Hello and welcome. Welcome to another live. Let us start by sharing that recently the government of Canada announced that it will set an intake cap on international student permit applications for 2 years. In the context of this announcement, some international students will require a provincial attestation letter for this conversation, for this chat, for this talk. I am joined by Ruren. Hello, Ruren. How are you doing?
Hello, Natasha. I'm doing good. How are you doing?
I'm doing awesome as well. Thanks for joining in on this conversation. Before we get into it, I just want to make it clear that we're not immigration lawyers or consultants. We're merely sharing based on public information and experiences. So we're just here to give you an update as it relates to what they're now referring to as the provincial attestation letter. Ren, how are you feeling about these new updates?
Well, it's interesting. It's always interesting to find out where they're heading with these. They did mention the attestation letter earlier, but not much details were provided on it. So it's good to see that they're slowly but surely putting out, some of the things or some of the requirements that, will be associated with this letter.
Yeah, definitely. And it gives us a better picture of, the expectations of, I guess, some international students. And that is always good to see and good to know. So to all the persons there in the live chat, remember to hit the like button, the share button, and the subscription button as well. All right. And support us as we try to support you. If it is that you want to come and study in Canada, or if it is that you know somebody who wants to study in Canada. All right, so most students, according to the government of Canada, need to provide a provincial attestation letter from the province or territory where they plan to study. And so, how to get a provincial attestation letter? So, how to get a PAL? Each province or territory is developing a process to get a PAL, that is the provincial attestation letter, and these processes are expected to be in place by March 31st, 2024. So that information remains the same, Rurian, but now they have a name for it, provincial attestation letter. I guess the attestation letter was coming from the province, but how do you like the sound of pal? Peace and love, pal?
A nice name for it, provincial attestation letter. Was a nice name for it, and I think that's going to be catchy, and persons will remember this very much. And your pal normally helps you out, so this is what they're saying. The pal will help you to decide what works best for you as it relates to selecting the necessary institution in which you want to pursue your your studies. That's what you'll require from the province. So you need to have that file in order to make sure that you're ready to come to Canada and to study.
For sure, for sure. And I just want to highlight here that on the website, it is saying application received before 8:30 a.m. Eastern Time on January 22nd, 2024 do not require a PAL. So again, this announcement was made on January 22nd, 2024. And so what I believe the government of Canada is saying, and I guess IRCC now, is saying that applications that were sent in before 8:30 a.m. on January 22nd, 2024, they do not require a PAL, all right, a provincial attestation letter. So, Rural, in the context of who doesn't need a provincial attestation letter, this is where the expansion comes in for us. because we know, that persons attending like undergraduate students, that's where, the big impact is. But now we're getting a better understanding with some expansion. Some of the categories were already known. But let's just go through what, is listed there on the website. And so the first one, you do not need a PAL when applying for a study permit if you're applying to study in a preschool, primary school, or secondary school up to grade 12. So now we're seeing that. So K to 12, it's the same thing, kindergarten to grade 12. And they also have here preschool. So that is pretty much the same. And the next one here, if you are studying or applying to study in a master's degree or doctoral degree program, then you do not need a PAL. So, Ruben, anything you'd like to share on those 2 points so far?
Yeah, so it's pretty much saying that kids who are school age kids don't need this to get an education, and also the level of the persons who are studying, who are completing or pursuing masters and doctoral studies, they won't need a PAL. So that's pretty clear now, and I love the way how they have made this totally clear.
Yeah, for sure. So, this is clear and in that context. So you do not need a provincial attestation letter when applying for a study permit if you are in Canada and one of the following situations applies to you. So now here is where we're getting the majority of this expansion in the context of, if you're exempt from having to, add a provincial attestation letter with your application. And so before submitting. So here again, you when applying for a study permit, you do not need a PAL if you're in Canada and one of the following situations applies to you. If you're in Canada and you're applying for a study permit extension, having had a study permit already in place, then you do not need this provincial attestation letter. So that one was already there and very clear. So the next one here, Rurian, is if you're in Canada, right, you do not need an attestation letter if you're applying for a study permit and you have a work permit. So if you're in Canada on a work permit and then you would like to study, then you do not require the attestation letter. Any comments so far, Rurian?
No, I think those are pretty clear ones. So, once you're in this particular situation, then you won't need that letter.
Yeah, for sure. And welcome if you're just tuning in. We're just bringing you some updates regarding the provincial attestation letter in the context of, some more information here. Please remember to hit the like button, the share button, and the subscription button. And comment. Let us know where you're tuned in from. Comment. Let us know if you have a question. Or if you just want to big us up, leave your comment in the chat there. So the next context that we want to look at
Not
here.
really, just to break you a little bit. You're a bit low, not hearing you so well. So if you could repeat the last point that you were making, please, that would be helpful.
Can you let me know when you're hearing me better?
Hearing you perfectly well now.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you for letting me know that, Rurian. So what I was sharing in the context of the provincial attestation letter is that you do not need, a provincial attestation letter if you're in Canada and one of the following situations applies to you. The first one is you're applying for a study permit extension And so what I was explaining there, and hopefully persons in the chat, you're hearing me. So just comment and let me know if you're hearing me loud and clear. So in the context of, applying for that study permit extension, you would have had, a study permit in place already to study in Canada. So you would be in Canada having that initial study permit, and perhaps based on some unforeseen circumstances, you did not get the opportunity to complete your studies in the stipulated time frame, and as a result, you need to extend your study permit to get that additional time to complete your studies. So based on the information here, it is saying that if you're going to apply for a study permit extension, then you do not need a PAL, a provincial attestation letter. All right, so the next point, if it is that you're in Canada and you're going to apply for a study permit and you're on a current work permit, so you have a work permit here, so you're working in Canada, you do not need an attestation letter, a provincial attestation letter, if it is that you're going to study. And in the context of work permit, they did not specify to say open or LMIA based. So I am going to take it that it's just work permit in general. So once you have a work permit, then you do not need a PAL, a provincial attestation letter, if it is that you plan to study in Canada. All right, welcome, guys. I can see some persons here in the live chat. Please remember to hit the like button, the share button, and the subscription button. And of course, comment in the chat and let me know where you're tuned in from, or just say hello. Would love to give you a big voices in education hello or welcome. All right, so Rurian, do you have any comments so far?
Just want to just reiterate the fact that they have been, making this is becoming a lot clearer. So persons are going to be able to make better decisions because of the clarity in the information that is being presented. Identifying who will need this PAL and who does not need this PAL. I'm sure this will settle a lot of nerves and give persons an understanding of where they stand and where to go as it relates to their studies.
Absolutely, for sure there. And the next context here, if you are in Canada and you're a temporary resident who is a visiting or exchange student studying at a designated learning institution. All right, let's go over this one again. So remember, for this context, you must be in Canada. So if you're in Canada right now, right, and you're a temporary resident who is a visiting or exchange student studying at a designated learning institution, you do not require an attestation letter, that is a provincial attestation letter, if it is that you're going to apply for a study permit. So let me just try and break this down for you. But first, I need to have a drink of water. So Rurian, over to you if you'd like to share anything.
Okay, so we're gonna wait on you with this one, but thank you guys for coming over and spending this time with us. We really find interest in this topic, just trying to figure out, trying to understand fully what the requirements are and share our perspectives on how this would apply persons at different levels of this system, and just to see how you can make positive steps or make better decisions based on the discussions that we're having here. So this is pretty much an opportunity for us to learn from each other and to make the best decisions that would make us have a brighter future.
For sure. Thank you so much, Ruren, there for holding it down. So let's go to this point here in the context of being in Canada. So you're in Canada as a temporary resident and you're a visiting or exchange student studying at a designated learning institution. All right, so from experience and interactions, you have some students, let's use Jamaica as the example because I am aware of this context. So you have students who may come from, say, University of Technology, UTech, or the Northern Caribbean University, NCU, and they come to Canada to a designated learning institution to say perhaps spend a semester taking some courses as part of an exchange program. So what the government of Canada or IRCC is saying here is that if for any reason a student who is attending, a designated learning institution, visiting or an exchange program, for example, they do not require an attestation letter if it is that they're wanting to remain and study in Canada. So that is definitely important. So in this context, right, it is also important to know that Canada has a list of institutions, all right, that has a DLI, so a designated learning institution number. All right. And so to apply for a study permit, you need an acceptance letter from a designated learning institution. All right. So in this context, what the government is saying, or IRCC is saying that a DLI is a school approved by a provincial or territorial government to host international students. All right. And so in the context of this, all primary and secondary schools in Canada are designated learning institutions. So all the, K to 12 schools, they are designated learning institutions, and by virtue of that, they are not included in the list. All right, Rurian, perhaps you need to mute over there. And they're not included on this list. And so if you plan to attend, post-secondary, so at the college or university level, make sure that the institution is on the DLI list. And then there's another aspect to that in the context of DLI institution. You now need to ensure that these institutions, and more so colleges, that they're not private institutions associated with a curriculum licensing agreement. All right, so we talked about that in a previous video, but just to just share that here in this context, because that is definitely important there. Rurian, would you like to, share some more here, or just based on, your thoughts so far?
Yeah, so one needs to be aware of the fact that an institution is a designated learning institution, so that you are investing in something that will benefit you in the future. So if you are not going to apply to one of these or have one of these, that's going to affect your application process. So you have to ensure that you are working with one of those institutions that are designated for such.
Yes, absolutely. And I see Anne Marie Brown Walters here in the chat. Good afternoon to you too, and welcome. And soon we'll open the phone lines to take some calls. So, Anne Marie, if you have a question or if you just want to say hello, we'd definitely love to hear from you guys. Please remember to hit the like button, the share button, and the subscription button. All right, definitely important. All right, so in that context, so we're still looking at, if you're in Canada and one of the following situations applies to you, all right, then you don't need a provincial attestation letter. So the next context here is if you're a temporary resident who has completed a course or program of study that is a prerequisite to you enrolling at a DLI. All right, so if you're a temporary resident, and it could be in the case where, you have some students who come and they do like university English programs before actually going into starting the programs for their studies. And so that might be the context there that IRCC could be referring to, although this is not explicitly stated. I believe that that context fits perfectly here. And for example, you can take a course of study that is less than 6 months without a study permit. So if it is that you have taken a course, at a DLI, so at a designated learning institution, then you may be able, if you want to get to apply and receive a study permit without this provincial attestation letter. So that is definitely important in this context here. So in the context that you're in Canada as a temporary resident and you have completed a course of program, that is a prerequisite to you enrolling at a DLI. So at a designated learning institution, then you do not need that provincial attestation letter. So again, what comes readily to my mind, students taking, English courses just to matriculate into the university program of study based on their choices. Or perhaps you might be on, say, a visitor visa and you're here in Canada and you decide that, okay, I am going to enroll in this program. Let me see how this course is going. And if I am successful, then I could gain acceptance into the program that I would like. And so based on that, then you would not need the provincial attestation letter based on my understanding. All right, so that one there is, I guess, needed a little bit of unpacking, but perhaps I believe those contexts that I shared just now are quite applicable. So the next one here, if you're in Canada and you're under a removal order, but can't be removed from Canada at this time. All right, so this one is pretty much saying if you're in Canada and under a removal order, but can't be removed from Canada at this time, then you do not need a provincial attestation letter. All right, so that is what that one is saying there. All right, so if you have a removal order and you're not able to go, so you can't be removed from Canada. And I guess if you decide to study, then you do not need a provincial attestation letter. That's my understanding here. Let's move to the next one. So this one is like if you're in Canada, right? So we're looking at the situations where you're in Canada and you do not require a provincial attestation letter. So the next one here, if you're in Canada, you have a temporary resident permit valid for at least 6 months. So if you're in Canada and you have a temporary resident permit valid for at least 6 months, then you do not need an attestation letter. So that's an interesting point there. And again, we're getting some clarity as it relates to, what Canada is referring to in the context of these exemptions. As a matter of fact, more updates here. All right, so let's look at what is a temporary resident permit because, that might be important for some persons here. So it is a permit that may be granted in exceptional circumstances to a person who does not meet the requirements of Canada's immigration law to enter or remain temporarily in Canada. All right, so that's what they're explaining as a temporary resident permit. And that seems to be different from a temporary resident visa. All right, so I guess that there are some differences there. All right. So a temporary resident, I'm looking here, you have a visitor, student, or worker. All right. So then I guess I'm not sure. Maybe there are some, connections there. I'll just do some checks to see and let you know what is going on here. So in the meantime, over to you, Ruben.
Yeah, so some good points there that was made by Natasha Lee. So just to review a few things that she has said so far. So if you're in Canada, you there are some options that comes your way where you don't necessarily need that PAL, and those are things that we should pay keen attention to. Once you're in Canada, it is a little bit easier to get your, I would say, to have your studies done, and you could do this by just getting your hands on certain information that would help you to to make good decisions. So if you're a temporary resident who's living in or visiting or exchange student studying at a designated learning institution, then you would need that. So Natasha Lee has gone through those already. If you're a temporary resident who has completed a course or program of study that is a prerequisite for you to enroll at a designated learning institution. So anything that you have to do in order to make yourself, qualified for a DLU, then that would not require a PAL. So, these are things that is important for us to know so that we can make certain decisions as it relates to our future. She has also gone through the one that talks about, removal order, and you know, as she explained that, it's not necessarily the same thing as a deportation order, but it is, you know, something that, is unique in the sense that if you're given a removal order and you cannot be removed, then you can, actually start some course of study. And in this case, you would not need the PAL either. Or, if it's a case that you are studying already and you got that removal order, but you can't be moved, then you won't need that either. So some interesting points here, some interesting developments here as it relates to the use of the attestation letters that will be awarded by the provinces, and how best one would be able to weave themselves through this process. So good to have an explanation or interpretation of what the government has put forward as it relates to these new information as it relates to the attestation letter.
Wonderful, thank you. And just to go back to that point of the removal order, I am not sure if these persons would be studying already, because if you're studying already, perhaps that would be a different case. So I'm just looking at it that perhaps, you're claiming a status and that was perhaps denied. And so they gave you some time to leave. So if it is that, you're going to study or well, and you can't be removed because that is definitely important to the context here, then you may be able to apply if you want for a study permit application without the need for an attestation letter. And I believe in this context, you will have cases to this nature. So I feel that this is perhaps a plus where you'll see some of these lawyers trying to get to this point where, okay, you have a removal order, you cannot be removed for whatever the circumstances may be. I'm not sure what that is going to look like, or if there are certain, criteria as it relates to that context. But for sure, there's an avenue here where you can apply for a study permit. All right. So let me know if you're still hearing me real loud and clear.
Loud and clear. Yeah.
Wonderful, thank you. So I was just checking for some information regarding the temporary resident permit. And so in this context, I am seeing here on, Canada.ca, if you're otherwise inadmissible but have a reason to travel to Canada that is justified in the circumstances, you may be issued a temporary resident permit. To be eligible for a temporary resident permit, your need to enter or stay in Canada must outweigh the health or safety risk to Canadian society as determined by an immigration or a border services officer. Even if the reason you're inadmissible seems minor, you must demonstrate that your visit is justified. There is no guarantee that you'll be issued a temporary resident permit. All right, so it tells you how, and in the context of how long you can stay in Canada with this. So with a temporary resident permit, it's usually issued for the length of your visit to Canada. For example, 1 week to attend a conference. You must leave Canada by the expiry date of the permit or get a new permit before your current one expires. This permit may be canceled by an officer at any time. The permit is no longer valid once you leave Canada unless you have specifically been unless you have been specifically been, let's do that again. The permit is no longer valid once you leave Canada unless you have specifically been authorized to leave and re-enter Canada. So it's important to read. So in this context, if you are given a temporary resident permit to come to Canada and you're in Canada, you can apply for a study permit without the need for a provincial attestation letter. So just to let you know, but the temporary resident permit must be valid for at least 6 months. All right, so if it has to be valid for at least 6 months. So some other context here, all right, where you do not need a provincial attestation letter if you're in Canada, right? So if you're in Canada and say your family member, so you're the family member, sorry, of a foreign national who lives in Canada and is one of the following: a study permit holder, a work permit holder, a temporary resident permit holder with a permit that's valid for at least 6 months. All right, let's look at these first few ones. So I'm trying to get this one, Maureen, and perhaps you can help me here. I'm just going to go back to the first category. They say you do not need a PAL when applying for a study permit if you're in Canada and one of the following situations applies to you. So we have to read this now in the context. So that is a big bullet point there. And so you must be in Canada, right? And while you're in Canada, you are also the family member of a foreign national who lives in Canada and is one of the following. So if you come to Canada, for example, let's say on a temporary resident visa, right? On a visa, a visitor visa, and you have, say, for example, your mom who is studying. So your mom has a study permit. Then what I am understanding here is that you do not need that attested provincial attestation letter, but you must be in Canada. All right. The same goes if you have a family member with a work permit and you come to Canada, all right, you can apply for a study permit without the provincial attestation letter. And of course, they're going to require, documentation to support your application. So you have to show proof, all right? The next one here, if you're a temporary resident permit holder with a permit that's valid for at least 6 months. So if you happen to have someone in Canada who has a temporary resident permit that has at least 6 months in terms of validity, then as the applicant who is in Canada with that family member on that temporary resident permit, you do not need a provincial attestation letter. Ruren, any thoughts here? What are your views so far?
Well, this is quite interesting. It's pretty much saying that once your family member has that status, then any of these status, then you are pretty much, not in need of the PAL. However, time is important for persons who, if your family member holds a temporary resident permit, that needs to have at least 6 months on it. So that's pretty clear and straightforward, I think. And I think this is good to the fact that you're here. If your family members have that status, then you don't need to worry about the past.
Absolutely. Appears just like that. So let me just take a quick look in the chat here and let us see what is happening here in the chat. Not seeing any new comments here in the chat just yet, but remember to hit the like button, the share button, and the subscription button. All right, so the next point here is that if you're in Canada, so you're in Canada, all right, and you're the family member of a foreign national who lives in Canada, all right, and is one of the following: a member of armed forces in another country under Visiting Forces Act. And there you go. You can go and look at what that Visiting Forces Act is saying. That's going to be a lot there. And an accredited foreign government representative. All right, so you do not need that. Let me see if I can expand on this point here, if the information is not too much. So accredited foreign government representative, this includes an employee of a foreign government who works for a Canadian government department under an exchange agreement, or an accredited diplomat, consular officer, official, or representative of another country. So if you have somebody perhaps working at the Jamaica High Commission, I guess you do not need a provincial attestation letter. An accredited representative or official of the United Nations, or an accredited representative or official of an international organization of which Canada is a member. So we're seeing some expanded exemptions here, and I guess that is, looking good so far, so good. The next point here, you're the family member of a foreign national who lives in Canada and is one of the following: a worker in Canada who is a member of a foreign news company or a religious worker. So that's a big, thing there. These two categories, I'll say big. So let me see if I can expand on that. All right. So and also a participant in certain sports activities or events. So if you have a family member, if you're the family member of a foreign national who lives in Canada and is a participant in certain sports activities or events, and what they're saying here is that this exemption applies if your family member is a foreign athlete or coach, a member of a foreign team competing in Canada, a member of a Canadian amateur team. And so, let's look at track and field. So, if your family member, say, is a coach here in Canada or, an athlete, I guess being coach in Canada, then you do not need a PAL. All right. So, that's that there. And let's see what is next year. So if you're a worker in Canada who is a member of a foreign news company, and what the government is saying here, or immigration IRCC, they're saying this exemption applies if your family member is a news reporter or member of a reporter's crew, a member of a film or media crew who will not enter the Canadian labor market, a journalist who works for a print, broadcast, or internet news service, journal, newspaper, magazine, television show, a resident correspondent, a manager or member of clerical staff, as long as the event is short term, 6 months or less. All right, so those are, the exemptions given in that category of a worker in Canada who is a member of a foreign news company. The next one, the final one here, is a religious worker. And so in this context, this exemption applies if your family member is in Canada, all right, helping a congregation to reach spiritual goals, preaching doctrine, leading worship, or providing spiritual counseling. Examples of religious leaders include missionaries, monks, pastoral animators, archbishops, and bishops. And so archbishops and bishops, so they give you specific in terms of, the categories and what the exemptions mean in the context of some of, I guess the exceptions, for the PAL. And that is important in the context of giving us a better understanding of, what this, provincial attestation letter process will be like, and also in the context of, exemptions. And so I believe, as the weeks unfold, we'll get more information for sure, and we'll be here sharing as always. Rurian, over to you.
Yeah, for sure. These
You're a bit
explanations
low,
really go.
or you're a bit low.
Are you hearing me better now?
No, still low.
All
Or
right, let me just adjust
same. Yeah,
myself. Let me a bit better now.
yes, for sure.
Okay, great. Yeah, so really good to have these explanation on each category to see, precise or direct information, concise information about who are exempt from, from this PAL. So it's really interesting how things are, panning out. And as you rightly said, I think weeks coming, there will be little adaptations or tweaks or additions to this in order to deal with the concerns or the needs of these, of people.
For sure, for sure. I'm just going to check the chat and see. So, guys, I'm going to drop the WhatsApp number in the chat, and I'll see if, persons would like to phone in If we're not getting any questions, we're going to wrap this one up. All right, because we got this information, we really wanted to share with you. So we're here. I know some persons might not be able to join us right now, but for the persons here, let me know if you have any questions. There is the WhatsApp number there in the chat. So just give me a WhatsApp call and we'll just talk. So we'll just wait to see if we get any calls here. So again, we had, we had some updates recently by virtue of, IRCC sharing in the context of the provincial attestation letter. We have seen
Not actually just to- just sorry to be cutting you, but just to let the viewers know too, at any time if you have any question, you could always, type it in the chat or reach out, and it could be dealt with as soon as it is seen, because probably persons will be watching this after, and the questions might pop up at that point in time. So that's what I wanted to add. Sorry to disturb your thoughts.
And could you remind me where I was with what I was saying that would be good?
I think you are just heading out and just giving an overview of what we discussed just now.
I'm not too sure if that's where I was heading, but I just want to say that, we have seen some changes in the context of the PAL, changes where, the information has been expanded. So now we have a little bit more to work with in that context. All right. And so this is definitely good in the sense where we're seeing more exemptions now than just, master's level students and, that and doctoral studies and, K to 12. So that is definitely good. So we realize that, updates are being made, and as soon as we get them or we're aware of them, we'll definitely be here sharing with you. And as Rurian shared, you may be listening this conversation after we end here. So if you have questions, leave them in the chat and we'll try to see how best we can answer your questions. All right. Please remember to hit the like button, the share button, and the subscription button. Lauren, do you have any final comments?
Well, just to say, thanks for, going through these points and explaining, getting, giving us a deeper understanding of this, and, to understand our position as it relates to, what is happening regarding the PAL, persons who are exempted, and, persons who will require the PAL versus persons who does not require that, persons who do not require that path. So yeah, just really informative for all of us here. And just want to say thanks for all the persons who have tuned in.
Wonderful. Thank you too for joining me in this conversation. And, for all the persons there in the chat, thanks as well. And again, please remember to hit the like button, the share button, and the subscription button. And importantly, tap that bell and select all so that you do not miss any updates from this channel. All right, until then, take care, everyone. Blessings and love. See you in the next live.